Eric asks Chris if he's serious about sending him back, but Chris knows that if Eric stays any longer, he might ruin the peace that he tried so hard to establish. Chris comes up with some witty excuse telling him that the citizens of Surcardo wouldn't be at peace if their king wasn't there. Eric blushes and agrees with Chris, so tells Erewhon that it's time to return. Chris bows and says goodbye to his majesty, and actually sets off himself. He turns towards Nova and tells him to come along. Nova uses this opportunity to speak privately with Chris, asking if he can speak freely. He knows that Chris has some great knights that are all able to use the wise ability double, and asks Chris if he has reached the 5th stage. Chris tells him that he hasn't yet, and the 5th stage is the wall for most wise users, and only 2 people in the continent have surpassed that wall of being a superhuman, Guillen and Abel. Chris has been training ever since the Civil War, but his wise is stuck at level 48. But his goal right now isn't reaching the 5th stage. Wisers are gifted with a unique power depending on their training method. Chris and his wise knights have the power, Tempest Tower. It's its biggest strength that it can be used to get instant explosive power. But there's a limit to using it continuously. And currently, Chris's physical condition can't sustain this power for a long time. And right now, it's causing him a lot of damage. Chris can't keep pushing himself the way he is. But on the other hand, the Blue Dragon's clan's wise, Dragon Rose, creates 2 emblems on the Wiser's back, and it's specialized in prolonged use of wise as it steadily releases power. And that's the kind of wise technique that Chris needs to learn now. You'll have to get it no matter what. We shift back to the troop assembly area, and Chris is meeting with 2 of the officials, asking if everyone has gathered yet. The Platinum Shield clan and the Black Lion clan are not here yet, and they're having a hard time fighting the orc army. Chris understands and gets the news that a scout was sent to the terrain around Edeniano, and orcs are headed that way, about 10,000 of them. Chris knows that at this speed, they'll arrive by tonight. One of the commanders tells the group that they should not fight the orcs at night due to their adapted eyesight. But Chris doesn't agree. He wants to start the battle as soon as possible, and he has a plan, and asks Lynn if he brought all the materials that was entrusted to Grop. Lynn says that everything is prepared, and Chris quickly turns to Nova, telling him to gather straw and dried grass until the sun sets. Nova is confused but sends his men to work. We shift to nighttime and the orcs sound their horn and begin their charge. Nova stands ready to intercept and tells his men to light the fires. All of a sudden, tens of torches start lighting up in front of the castle wall, illuminating the area. The orcs are stunned momentarily, and the soldiers use this opportunity to charge at them. Nova and his men start making quick work of the orcs, and even Perth charges in to join the fight. Nova tells his men to hold their positions and not to get pushed back. He flashes back to Chris's instruction as he told them to get as much attention as possible. The orcs are getting enraged as they start targeting the torches. They start to push the 8-gate army back. The men are starting to get slaughtered as the 8 gates cannot withstand much longer. Nova sees what's going on and tells his men to retreat to the castle gate. We shift back to the original plan as one of the commanders says that fighting the orcs at night is suicide. Darkness is like a living room for the orcs. Chris thinks they need to do something because they won't win the war by only attacking the orcs in the sunlight. But suddenly, a rumble is heard in the distance as the orcs turn to see an army compiled of chariots. Chris starts to smile. If they can win in the darkness, then they'll really have an edge on this war. The first chariot rides in, slashing many orcs in its wake, and Chris arrives with the chariot troops. They charge in and start decimating the orcs. The people on the chariots also have an order to throw straw on the corpses of the orcs and light them on fire. This creates a natural wall of fire, separating the orcs from their reinforcements. Chris looks past this wall and tells the orcs to hurry up. Come and get us. The leader of this troop wonders if that was the man who killed the previous army. One of the lackeys tells him that it is, and the leader tells the orcs that it's time to retreat. The troops watch on, and it seems they won this night. Tigo wonders if they should chase down the orcs, but Chris knows that they won't gain anything from that. He thinks to himself that this orc had superior judgment. He saw that he was losing the battlefield and didn't rush in recklessly. And that scares him, because orcs are not supposed to have such a high intelligence. This war definitely won't be easy. We see the orcs returning, and now there's a change of plan. They're only going to be able to win this war after they kill the strategist, Chris, the man with golden eyes and bluish black hair. They need to kill him at all costs. An axe is hurled onto the ground, but Royce dodges. He slices the head off of the orc, and this battle has lasted for 4 days. The orcs keep coming. Chris and his men are desperately holding the defense. But in these 4 days, Chris has managed to copy 2 Y's techniques. Nova's Dragon Y's and another technique that focuses Y's into the legs, that Perth utilizes well. The battle comes to an end for the day, but it seems the orcs have a plan to tire out the soldiers. Their chariots are starting to break down, and Chris is noticing that his side is being hit harder than the others. We see Chris meeting with Nova, and the man brings up the idea to chase the orcs out. Surely they can win in a battle in an open field. Chris thinks that this would be possible because as it stands, they are not winning this war of attrition. The main problem is there has to be some sort of plan behind the orcs' attacks. Chris needs to find out what that plan is. He tells Nova not to be hasty, they need to wait for their remaining troops before making this decision. The next day comes, and like the previous, the orcs charge in again. Chris notices that he himself is being targeted by the orcs. He uses his wise powers to chop tens of orcs in half. Chris's boys see him struggling and move in to help, and then Chris is escorted back to the tent. He curses himself, it's happening again. Most of the orcs are just flocking towards him. Are they aware that Chris is the mastermind? Because right now his wise is reaching its limit. His body won't hold up if he uses any more. The only thing that he can do is imprint the seal of the blue dragon. Chris starts the process, and he has read all the books related to wise, but has never heard of someone being able to use more than one wise seal. This might be a gamble, but if it works, Chris's power will skyrocket. Chris starts to have new emblems envelop on his back, but there's no response. Chris gets discouraged that he won't make it work, but maybe it will just take some time. Suddenly, Lind opens the tent and calls for an emergency meeting. The orcs are moving. All the reinforcements have arrived, and we're introduced to the leaders of the Black Lion and Platinum Shield families. The orcs number 50,000, and it's the largest force that they have faced so far. The combined allied force meets them head on. Nova comments on the strange behavior the orcs have been displaying, and they were aiming directly for Chris. Perhaps they see Chris as the leader of this army. Chris says that they should have the same plan. They need to target the orc leader. He should appear once he believes the troops are exhausted. Chris thinks the orc leader will be in a place where he can survey the battlefield. So he wants to organize a special squadron to take his head. The leader of the Black Lions asks if this squad will be able to break through the orcs' lines. Chris tells Gien to come in, and he's wearing some pretty badass armor. The men are shocked. Gien is donning a special set of Wise Knight armor. This can't be worn easily. Gien Ludwig is the strongest Wise Knight in Proudman. The squad to hunt the orc leader will be comprised of the strongest knights from each army. The soldiers from the 8 gates will choose theirs accordingly. We shift to Proudman Castle, and we see Agatha prick herself with a needle. She feels anxious but begins to pray to her god to bless Chris and his army. Chris stands in the pouring rain facing the countless number of orc savages. Chris thinks that the leader he is looking for won't be with the army, since before the army was composed of different species like trolls and goblins. Chris knows who the leader should be, and it was someone who caused a lot of damage in his past life, the one-eyed orc, Blacksword. The two armies start sizing each other up, with Chris's force making up the center, the Proudman army on the right, and the 8 Gates army on the left. And we see Gien in his chatted up armor leading the special task force. Chris hasn't mastered the blue dragon technique, but he doesn't have time to think about that. As his troops are called to be ready to engage, the two sides begin to roar and the battle commences. Men and orcs alike are dying left and right, and like always, they are targeting Chris. But this time, he has Pumpkin by his side. The dog sets some orcs ablaze, and Chris needs to save his energy and fight without Wise, at least for now. His knights are taking care of the orcs, but Nova and Ellis spot some mysterious black orcs. These are orcs that can use Wise. Digo and Lin are holding their own, and Gien charges in with the black and platinum leaders. 2 orcs stand in Gien's way, but he turns them into mincemeat. Doki and Ellis are fighting some of the black orcs, and they are much stronger than the regular ones. Blacksword is overseeing the battle and calls for the real battle to begin. Gien can't spot the orc leader, but all of a sudden, a mysterious fog fills the arena, and Blacksword tells Chris to stop. He's been surrounded. Chris notices that he's been separated from his help. He quickly turns to tell Royce to hold down this position, and he rushes through the smoke to meet Blacksword. But as he's rushing through the smoke, a sword strike almost pierces his head. Ah boy, you have some good reflexes. Royce tries to reconnect with Chris, but 4 wise orc warriors stand in his way. Royce is going to be their target for now. Blacksword emerges from the fog. He knew Chris would be here, and now he will die. Royce knows the situation that he is in. He's surrounded by 4 second-class warriors. He might have to use that technique. We flash back to Chris instructing his men of the arrow tactic. This is what is happening to Royce right now. The stronger warriors group up and annihilate key targets of their enemy. The basic composition is 4 second-class warriors. The fight begins as the 4 orcs dash into Royce, and he knows that he is their target. Royce defends each strike. He's being pushed back. He remembers Chris's words. If you find yourself in this situation, use your full strength or run away. We shift back to Chris being face to face with Blacksword, confused on why he's here. Black Sword picks up on the confusion. Why, did you think I was hiding like some coward, you arrogant human? I can also target your back. Black Sword charges up his wise energy and prepares a strike for Chris. Chris blocks, but the blow causes him to cough up blood. Pumpkin tries to defend his master, but is smacked across the field. Chris yells out for his dog, but Black Sword appears behind him, telling Chris that he is weak. Chris barely parries the attack and has already sustained some heavy damage. Black Sword is the best warrior out of the orcs, and is at a similar level to Chris. If Chris doesn't use Wise, he won't win. We shift back to Royce, barely hanging in there, as he dodges another incoming fist. A spike club swings, sending him back a few feet. He can't see an opening. What can he do? It seems hopeless. Royce realizes that the true objective of these orcs are Chris, and that means he needs to hold them here to not interfere with Chris's battle. Royce's demeanor changes, ready to take on these savages. They charge in again, but Royce is more prepared to parry their strikes. He's interfering with their attack strategy. Louis Ilnoven. He's been wielding the sword since he was a boy, and after his parents died, he swore to be strong, to protect his sister. Maybe it was due to this desperation that drove him to train even through his terminal sickness, but he truly is the gem of the Ilnoven family. He awakened the ability Judgment, which gives him the foresight to make the best decision in any situation. He took that latent ability of his family and made it his own. He can block an attack from any direction, in the most efficient way, as we see him take the orcs off balance, with each blow they try to send his way. The orcs are starting to get frustrated and charge in together. Right now, Royce is blooming like a flower, and this is the perfect training ground for him to perfect his special determination. He easily maneuvers out of their attack, and Royce tells these stupid orcs that they are the ones who fell into a trap, and Royce will keep them here until his life runs out. The orcs continue their assault on Royce, but still aren't able to get a clean hit. The anger is starting to build, and we shift back to Chris's fight, as he is using his full strength to take on Black Sword. The orc narrowly dodges Chris's spear, and comments on his nice weapon. Chris can't see an opening in this guy's defense. He has no wasted movement. And Chris still can't use his new wise powers. He needs to settle this now. He unleashes a barrage of stabs at the orc, but it has no effect. The two get into a fierce melee, but Chris slips a dagger right towards the orc's eye. Black Sword raises his hand to defend, and Chris uses this opportunity to slash the orc with his artifact. He was aiming for Black Sword's eye, but he missed. Chris needs to exploit the orc's blind spot, but this just makes Black Sword laugh. Do you think those weak tactics will triumph over me? Pathetic. Show me your next move. We turn back to Royce, who's been defending against these orcs for 10 minutes now, and the fatigue is starting to build. Humans aren't as physically gifted as orcs. Royce is starting to fade. The orcs capitalize on this chance, and a swing is coming down on our poor boy. Royce tries to dodge it, but he can't move out of the way, so he parries it instead, and the strike sends shockwaves through the air. But Royce still stands. He's missing part of his shoulder. The orcs praise Royce for his strength, but it wasn't enough. And now, it's all over. Royce falls into the wet ground, apologizing to his lord Chris and to his sister. I pray you don't grieve too much. Two orcs appear right in front of Royce, ready to end his life. But a flash of red intercepts as Guillen appears. 4 orcs. An arrow tactic, huh? Guillen tells Royce he did an amazing job holding out this long, but now he'll take over. Black Sword is starting to savor the fight with Chris. He loves Chris's expression. His face is full of fear. It's the only face these pathetic humans can make. Chris blocks another attack, but his wise is starting to rip apart his body. He can't hold out any longer. Chris tries to get into position, but Black Sword dashes in again, striking Chris once more. Chris managed to dodge, but sees little hope in winning. He sends another powerful stab, but Black Sword sidesteps it with ease. The orc tells Chris that he's in a hurry, so he's gonna wrap this up. He sends Chris flying into the air, as he promises him that the orcs will rule this land. Chris hits the floor hard, battered and beaten. He can't move. His whole life flashes before his eyes. Is this how it ends? Chris starts to fade. He's so tired. He just wants to rest. Black Sword is going to take Chris's spear as a trophy. But Chris manages to get back up, telling the orc that this fight isn't over. Are you sure that this is enough? Black Sword is confused. Are you sure you tried everything? Because I still want to reach higher. Black Sword is amazed that Chris can still use energy and charges back in to rip the boy's head off. Chris pours all of the remaining wise energy he has and uses it on himself, shocking Black Sword. The surge of energy causes Chris to cough up blood as this intense force is ravaging his insides. He's trying to force his new powers to awaken, and all of a sudden, Chris disappears from Black Sword's sight. And now his body feels amazing. It's so light. It was like he was born again. His wise leveled up, and he's gained a new skill, as his aura changed to a bright yellow. His new power awakens. Dragon Rose. Black Sword rushes in at Chris, but in a single strike, Chris breaks both of his swords. Even Chris is baffled by his own speed, wondering if Black Sword is moving in slow motion. He dashes back in, making quick work of this once mighty orc. And now, Black Sword Sword's expression changes as he fears for his own life. He yells and charges back at Chris, but Chris twists Black Sword's words back at him, asking why he's dodging all of his attacks. Chris slams down on Black Sword, telling him that he likes his daggers and he will take them as a trophy. This enrages Black Sword as he calls out to his god and goes berserk. The two combatants' swords meet, and a huge explosion of black and yellow fills the area. The dust settles, and Royce rushes towards his lord, but he is shocked to see Chris a hair away from Black Sword's dagger. But his own spear impaled the mighty orc. Chris said that he will not run, but he never said that he was going to take the hit. The Proudman army erupts in cheers. Chris killed the enemy later. These screams fill the battlefield, and the orcs lost morale, and after 2 days of combat, they were eventually defeated. We time skip to a few days later, to Chris chilling with Pumpkin and Pixie, and she prepared some food for the good boy. Lind interrupts, telling Chris that they have a message from Amelia Gates. The king is looking for him. Chris is riding Pumpkin, but all of a sudden, his foot lights up with Tempest energy, and his Dragon Rose energy starts flaring up as well. These two auras are fighting for control over Chris's body, but after a short delay, Chris's wise comprehension levels up to 50, and he is astonished. Wise powers can grow while stimulating each other? What a discovery. If he can imprint other wises, he'll be the strongest man to ever live. We shift to the meeting between Sorte and Chris, and Sorte thanks Chris for his help. It wouldn't have been done without him, and asks how he can repay this debt. Chris says that he needs something from the royal treasury to prepare for the future. Sorte wonders why Chris needs to prepare since the war is over, but Chris reminds the king that the Orc Lord still lives, and their fight is not over. The king of the orcs rules not only over his kind, but also over goblins, trolls, ogres, and giants. Defeating him will put an end to this war once and for all. Sorte agrees and Chris bows in thanks, but notices Sorte's distressed look. Sorte says that after this war, he wants Chris to serve him. Chris just smiles and tells the king that he should already know the answer to that question, and Sorte smiles. He's surprised that he actually said that out loud, and he wonders if he wants Chris that badly, or is he just scared of having him as an enemy. Chris is escorted to the treasury, but not long after, he finds what he was looking for. He takes some armor that looks like trash, and the attendant is confused on why he's taking this. It's just junk. We shift to nighttime, and Chris took 2 things from the treasury. The first is a magic powder that can heal any wound, called Extra Life, and the other is the armor. He throws the armor into a fire and thinks that there are rumors that the descendant of the dwarf who made dragon's flesh resides in the 8-gauge treasury, and this treasure has to be purified by fire to reveal its true nature. Chris dons the now bright armor, Wise Knight armor, Dragon Lin. The nickname of Stage 5 Wise is called Forgotten Weight, and this allows one to bear the weight of this exclusive armor. The armor finishes transforming to fit Chris's body, and it looks pretty sharp. Pumpkin notices something, and a dagger is thrown at Chris. He manages to dodge, but in the forest he sees a fairy, who greets Chris. Chris asks who this is, but the fairy just laughs and thinks Chris is a funny guy. He's not actually here to fight, but wanted to meet Chris Proudman. You see, someone wants to see you. Have you heard the name Angzing Leonis? Chris says that he is quite busy, and the fairy starts to get serious, telling Chris that he will regret this decision. Make an answer. Chris stays silent and dashes towards the fairy, sending his spear inches from his face, telling him that this is his answer. The messenger gets to the point and goes to relay the message. Chris is concerned now, because Anzing is the leader of the Northern Empire, and what would he possibly want from him now? The next day comes and Ellis is training in the Eden Gate Blue Dragon's facility, and Alaire approaches, telling Ellis that he likes strong women and wants to duel, and if he wins, he wants her hand in marriage. But damn bro, how about you take her to lunch first? The fuck's your problem? We see Chris returning to camp and he passes Royce, and he asks about his injury. It's getting better day by day and Royce should be okay. Chris asks where everyone went, and we shift back to Ellis's duel, and she wiped the floor with Alaire. Ellis mocks the man, but the leader of the Black and Platinum families arrive, asking to spar as well. Ellis gets fired up by the challenge, and Doki also wants in. And now the 4 start fighting all at once. They dash in quicker than the eye can see, and their battle begins. Chris arrives and watches on, to this impressive display of Wise. Royce comments that the battle looks pretty even. The leader of the Black Lion spots Chris and thinks that this is a perfect opportunity to show him the power of the 8 gates. He sends Doki flying, and Ellis turns to call for him, but the Platinum leader is right behind her. She dodges the strike and goes to fight Delchen, the master of the Black Lions, with Doki. Chris is impressed that Delchen is holding his own against the 2 of them. That man is said to rival the Lance King. He sees the Black Lion engraving on his hand, and the Platinum shield crest on the abdomen. Both sides go in for a deciding strike, but Nova arrives, yelling at them to stop. A war is still looming. What are you guys doing? Delchen sighs and says that it was just a friendly spar, and sheathes his sword. He's quite disappointed that he couldn't show the difference in their power. Ellis says that if this was a real battlefield, the outcome would be different, but Delchen just laughs. Ellis sure has guts after all. We shift to the Edeniano defense meeting, and Nova starts the conversation, saying the orcs' movements have been shrinking, and their main objective now is finding the Orc Lord. Chris thinks that they need to find some info on the king, and he can't use his past life anymore since so much has changed. He has to use his own rationale. What is the best way to kill as many humans at one time? Interrupting his thoughts is a soldier bursting into the room, telling the group that a new report details a huge army of orcs on the move, and they've passed through the Red Canyon. Chris analyzes the situation, and the canyon is a passageway to the central continent. It seems the orcs don't want to drag this out. Delchen orders his men to move out and thinks back to Nova's message. The King Sorte specifically ordered Delchen to retrieve the Orc Lord's head. They cannot let Sir Cardo take all the credit. Chris meets with Pixie thinking about what is going on and notices a box and asks Pixie what's inside. She says it's something from Sir Cardo, and Chris unboxes Moonlight and Sunshine, two prized artifacts, and he is happy with their arrival. Pixie is disappointed that there wasn't any food in the box, and honestly, I can relate to that. But Chris asks her for a favor. The war is going to be more fierce, and he's going to need her help. We shift to the orcs' base as a huge ocean of orcs stand in front of their king. The king tells his men to calm down. They can't get too excited, and he asks the elder next to him how the preparations are going, and is informed that everything is ready. The king calls for all the chieftains to meet, and we now see some new characters arrive, and they're ready to trample all over these weak humans. Chris brings Doki and Gien and gives them their new artifacts. Gien is gifted the sword Moonlight that got its name from its mysterious shine, and Doki is gifted the poleaxe Sunshine. Both are special weapons that can harness the power of Wise. Lin rushes into the tent, telling Chris that the orcs appeared in front of Edeniano. Chris is now worried. What is the Orc King after? The Eight Gates or Sir Cardo? Why are they splitting their forces? These plans are getting more and more complex. He doesn't want to fall into a trap. The Orc King is not an easy opponent. Chris calls for his men to prepare because they're leaving to the Red Canyon. Nova left Elaire and some men to join Chris, but Elaire's real objective is to see if the Orc Lord is where Chris is going, so he can inform Delchen. Elaire doesn't like his orders, but swears by them. Chris is riding with his men through the forest, and he is about half a day away. A new report arrives telling Chris that the orcs are waiting in the Red Canyon, possibly setting up an ambush. Chris thinks that he can't waste any more time, and tells Pixie that it's time for her to go to work. They will start once they reach the forest. We shift to some orcs waiting in the forest in ambush, bored out of their minds, but all of a sudden, a green fog fills the area. It's a poisonous herb called green light, and this is what Chris and Pixie have been working on, to thin out the orcs. Now they won't have to waste time on these petty ambushes. Chris plans to utilize Pixie's talents from here on out. She was once the best poisoner in the northern continent. Chris continues riding, and the orc army is right in front of him. He tells his troops to prepare for battle. The two sides engage, and Chris and his men make quick work of this orc army. Gen and Doki test out their new weapons, and they are in awe of their strength. The battle wraps up pretty easily, and Chris is taken aback. This army is smaller than he anticipated. But all of a sudden, a beat-up 8-gate horseman appears from the rear, telling Chris that they have a problem. The orcs are breaking down the walls of Ediano. We shift to the battlefield and see some black orcs wreaking havoc on the poor soldiers. Nova is holding the line, but he's being pushed back. A goblin tries to stab him, but Delchen intercepts. They sent an envoy to Chris and are praying for backup. But in the distance, a murderous dark aura fills the battlefield, even shocking both of the Grand Knights. They can't move due to this intense killing instinct. This must be the Orc King. The king asks one question: who is your leader? Chris is now worried that he's been had by this distraction. The orcs were never planning on attacking Sir Cardo. This was a plot to divide Chris's forces, and if mutant monsters are attacking Ediano, then the Orc Lord has to be there. Chris tells his men that there's an emergency, and they need to return back now. Everyone begins riding back, and Elaire is now worried for his comrades. Chris tells them to relax and have some faith in his family. Chris thinks that they can return fast, but right as they exit the valley, a huge ogre blocks their path. An elite force springs an ambush. Chris's forces are being decimated, and one of the orcs points at Chris, but Digo rushes in ready to take care of this bastard. Chris orders for Lind, Digo, Ellis, and Royce to take care of these enemies, and the rest of his troops to follow him. Chris sees the damage his army is sustaining and vows that this time he will end this war. We shift back to Nova and Delchen facing the Orc Lord, confused on his question. The Orc Lord says that this war is meaningless, and he rules over every continent, and will make every leader of every race bow before him, and take full control over their species. This war has shown me that humans are quite resourceful, therefore I'll show you guys some generosity. Only the leader has to die, and the rest will be taken as my slaves. Delchen gets enraged and tells Nova that now there's a chance. Chris is not here. They will take this head together. The two dash in to either side of the Orc King, but the attacks don't faze him. Nova activates his Wise, but the Orc King sends him flying with one strike. Delchun takes his chance to send a slash right at the king, but he blocks it with ease. Delchun is shocked by this monster's skill, but Delchun thinks that if him and Nova work together, then they can win. The Orc King laughs. Do you pathetic humans think you can kill me? The ground around the king erupts with his energy, taking both men off guard. The Orc King dashes into Nova, sending his weapon flying into the air. Nova is now helpless, as the king bids him farewell, sending him flying into a nearby wall. The man coughs up blood, and the king asks if Nova thinks he's lucky to be alive. There is no luck. You only survived because I controlled my energy. You are merely a demonstration of my power. The monster turns towards Delchun and knows that this is the stronger knight, so maybe you're the leader. So I'm gonna start with you. Then I'll make my way through all of the human leaders. Chris's knights are now fighting the orc ambush, but these are no weak foes. Second class, at least. And the three-headed orc is a chieftain, who is giving them some trouble. The monster blocks one of Lin's arrows, and another orc tries to strike Lin from behind. Royce intercepts and cuts his arm off, but to his horror, the orc regenerates a new arm right in his face. Digo is taken aback. This orc has insane regeneration. They need to finish him in a single blow. This battle won't be easy. We shift back to Delchun's fight as the Orc King rushes back in, wanting to take care of the leader of the Black Lions. The barrage leaves Delchun speechless at this orc's power, but he has no time to think, as the king leaps in again. The blow cracks the ground, but Delchun dodges. He won't last long at this rate. He needs to make a decisive blow. The Orc King slashes his huge axe, but Delchun uses his chance to dash behind the king. But the Orc just laughs and uses the same move back on Delchun, asking if this is what you call a surprise attack. Delchun manages to block the strike, but the sheer force sends shockwaves through his body. A follow-up punch sends Delchun flying towards a nearby rock, leaving a trail where his body was sent. The king thinks that this is the limit of the human body, and the difference between their species. Humans were never destined to win. The weak will always be ruled by the strong, and because of destiny, I will kill you. Farewell. But interrupting the party is a blue spear that flies right past the king's face. He turns to see Doki save a gate soldier, and Chris and the reinforcements came just in time. Chris stands looking at the Orc King in his new badass armor, looking like a frickin' boss. I love it. The Orc King recognizes his blue hair and wonders if this is the one who annihilated his first army. Chris smiles, thanking the Orc King for recognizing him. Delchun yells for Chris to be careful. This orc is on a different level. Chris tells Pumpkin to stay back, as these two titans stand ready to face off against each other. Chris assures the king that he won't break that easily, and he's gonna make him regret ever invading this kingdom. The fight commences, and the king thinks that Chris isn't stronger than Delchun, and what he needs to be cautious of is that spear. The two exchange blows, but Delchun comes out of nowhere, trying to land a blow on the king. He tells Chris to be wary of the orc's fist. It can break almost any weapon. Chris analyzes the situation and knows that the Orc King is very fast. It's gonna be hard to find an opening. Chris tells Delchun to look for any opportunity to strike. He will keep the orc busy. Chris dashes in again, and the two let off strikes at each other that send shockwaves into the air. The orc has a higher overall wise level than Chris, so he's not gonna win with sheer power. He uses a jumping technique to take the orc off guard, and Delchun uses this chance to cut at the Orc King. But he doesn't get deep enough, even after using his full strength. The Orc King gets annoyed at these pesky flies and swats them away. Chris notices that the king changed his target to Delchun, and he has his weapon ready to end him. Chris puts all of the wise into his legs and intercepts the strike, but he fell for the king's trap, as he is punched hard into the stomach and is sent flying. He gets back up but is damaged from that strike. The orc tells these humans that their fatal flaw is that they always help the weak, but he is impressed that Chris could withstand that punch. But this changes nothing. The orc charges in to finish Chris, but Pumpkin dives in and takes the slash meant for Chris. In a desperate attempt, it lets off a flame attack that sends the king back. Chris goes to Pumpkin's aid, but the cut is deep. The Orc King isn't amused by this display, and if that wolf didn't grow up with humans, it would have been the leader of a pack. If only it wasn't infected by your weakness, Chris. Chris gets up with his aura oozing, and he tells Delchun to watch Pumpkin. The orc asks Chris if he plans to fight him without a weapon, but Chris tells the orc to shut that mouth. The orc is shocked, and Chris's energy starts to rise. He gains a new skill. He dashes in with the speed that is faster than the Orc King, and his power continues to rise as two more skills are unlocked. His blue and yellow aura are starting to combine, and even Delchun is in awe of Chris's sheer strength. He is now at a stage where he can manipulate Wise onto any part of his body at will, and Chris has reached the 6th stage of Wise as we see his proficiency raise to 60. The Orc King's demeanor changes, as now this fight is becoming more troublesome. Chris got a sudden power up, and now the king thinks that his Wise might be weaker by comparison. He starts to flare up his own aura, thinking that he will never be outdone by a mere human. Both combatants grab their weapons and lunge back in at each other. Their swords meet, and Chris mocks the Orc King. What happened to your calmness? Did you let a little human punch blow you away? The Orc King continues to become enraged, and his own power is starting to grow. The two disengage briefly and continue the fight. The battle is at a stalemate, with neither side getting an advantage. Chris gathers energy into his fist and punches the Orc King in the stomach, which makes him spit up some fluids. Chris asks him how he liked that one, huh? You think all humans are weak? The Orc King can't believe that he's being pushed back. He doesn't want to stay trapped because of these humans. And we flash back to when the Orc King was younger, and he asks his master why they are trapped in the outskirts of the continent. The old orc tells the boy that the humans are scared of their existence and do not want them roaming around their territories. Their species also rules over land and form groups together. It would be wise not to underestimate them. This started the Orc King's vendetta against the humans, and he promised to kill them all for trapping him and his people in the barren wasteland. He will conquer the world. Back to the present, the Orc King is enraged, yelling for Chris to die. No living being has ever survived against me, and that's how I conquered everything. Chris is blocking the barrage of attacks as the Orc tells him that there is no human that he can't crush. Chris tells him to shut up. He wants to protect his people and everything that he risked his life to build. He will never back down, no matter what kind of monster shows up. We shift back to the ambush in the canyon, and Chris's knights are being pushed back. But as long as each and every one of them have something to protect, they will never give up. The Orc and Chris get ready to give a final exchange, both screaming at the top of their lungs. Their powers meet and create a huge vortex, but Chris's slash removes one of the Orc King's arms. And now, the mighty monster is left speechless. I, the supreme being, lost to a mere human? Chris wastes no time and removes the head of the Orc King. Delchan is amazed. Chris actually did it. He beat that monster, despite being a human, the hero of the battlefield, Chris Proudman. With this, the war with the orcs ended, and the death of the Orc Lord made all the remaining forces retreat. Mankind also suffered many casualties. Thankfully, our boys didn't die in the canyon ambush, as they dealt with the orcs there. But in the end, humanity was protected. Chris ended up using his special healing powder on Pumpkin, and honestly, very worth it. This show can't go on without our good boy. Pixie is amazed by watching this miracle medicine work, but Chris tells Pumpkin from now on he can't join him in battle, and promises to protect him. 2 weeks pass and they meet with Chris once again. He asks again if Chris would join the 8 Gates, but Chris tells him that Sorte wouldn't trust him if he betrayed his own nation. Sorte agrees but thinks to himself that he must absolutely never make an enemy of Chris. He wants to reward Chris with something, but Chris says he already has what he wanted. Sorte smiles and says that he already prepared a gift, and he will see it once he gets back to Sir Cardo. We see Chris with Pixie on his way back looking for Pumpkin, and he appears in the distance, looking at Chris. Pixie thinks that the wolf might want to stay for a while, as he feels he is holding Chris back. Chris has a sad expression, but understands, and tells Pumpkin that he will see him again. The Orc Elder is surprised that the Orc King failed. His skin starts to melt away as the disguise is shown, and it's the same fairy that encountered Chris, and he knows now that his real target is Chris Proudman. Man, why Pumpkin gotta leave, man? It's my favorite character. I don't know, is Pumpkin gonna train? Is he gonna get stronger, man? I don't know. We'll have to see what happens, but that makes me really sad. Thank you for joining us on Manhwa Assassin today. If you enjoyed our Manhwa manga recaps and want to stay updated on all the latest releases, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Your support means the world to us.